Welcome! This is ProductCamp Conversations, a podcast for curious product people, hosted by Allison and Dave. Each week, they think out loud with a rotating guest about the parts of product that don't fit on a roadmap, community, the human element, and the hallway conversations. Be sure to like and subscribe so you get new episodes every week. Give some extra love providing a review wherever you're listening. It helps other product people find us. Now, let's get into today's show.
Hey, Allison, how you doing today?
Hey, Dave. How are you?
Good. I'm excited that we're going to start a week off with a guest. Actually, David, I just finished up your book this morning. So at the end of it, I finished the rest of it on my walk this morning. So thank you for making my walk more enjoyable.
Fantastic.
Excellent.
We're so excited to have David Dean with us today, and let's jump into the conversation. So, David, I'd love to get your thoughts on a little bit about where you came into product. Where we'll certainly, I'm sure, as you heard, get into the book, but we want to save some time for your own product practitioner experience and maybe a little bit about where you are today in the vast product space.
Yeah, so the product space for me has been more about internal organization products, with it. So, I know there's a lot of product managers and product developers that are, in the B2B space with that. I'm more of usually in larger organizations and smaller ones and saying, what are your issues? What are your challenges around it? How can we assist and help you in regards to understanding what you need, to do your jobs every day? And understand your business processes and why you do the things that you do so that you can streamline whatever you need to streamline and improve those different types of dynamics with it. So it's really about internal self-improvement within the organization and so that they can be able to focus on things that are more revenue generating, from an organizational standpoint, and especially client facing with it. But there's a lot of internal solutions within the organizations that are indirect, for client facing avenues with it. So it's not just a pre-boxed or predefined solution. There's a daisy chain of things in order to be able to make that happen. And that's what I've spent most of my career on, is understanding those dynamics and those behaviors and designing products around that.
Yeah, awesome. It's a different space now that we have AI in that space, and I know we'll get into that in our conversation, but you and I actually met earlier this year at ProductCamp Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear, it's been a couple of months since we were there. Would love to hear about your experience with ProductCamp Phoenix, and what did you take away from the sessions that you were able to attend, or what was something that stood out to you about the event?
Yeah, so there is a wealth of experience and knowledge out there of all kinds of different dynamics with it. And it's really interesting. It allows you to get exposure to all the different types of unique opportunities that each of these product developers, whether it's a formal developer or a product manager, has had to experience in order to be able to accomplish a goal or an expectation with it. And being able to see that variety, it just shows that there's endless possibilities out there, from a product opportunity and learning opportunity and ways we can ultimately learn from each other to when certain things come up or address that can be confusing or just different types of ways of thinking or different implementation methods around that. And so it really creates that collaborative area in order to create that community that we're all in the same boat, with us. We're all still trying to there's a lot of stuff we're ultimately figuring out, and there's things that we have figured out. How can we get together to create clarity for everyone?
Yeah, that's, well, it's music to my ears because we've been working together so closely. But I really enjoy your perspective on it too, because this is a really difficult time for a lot of folks in product and in the business space in general. There's a lot of change happening across many organizations. What's something that perhaps being in a room of product practitioners like we did at ProductCamp Phoenix that perhaps is something that you weren't getting from the work that you do in governance today?
Yeah, so especially in the B2B space, because that's not something that I spend a lot of time on, it's a different set of challenges out there on the things that you have to consider, and especially around governance and security with it, because um, the client base has unique sets of requirements that can scale really easily, really fast, depending on what their needs are or how they're potentially utilizing the product with it. And it makes it, to a certain degree, more challenging to forecast what capabilities need to be, what security considerations you need to consider, what are all the potential behaviors that may happen relating to that. And so, to a certain extent, you need even more requirements than just from a traditional, like, straight directly from, a business user standpoint, say, this is what I do and this is how I handle it type of thing, because there's a lot of different possibilities with it. And especially when you, from a B2B standpoint, is you're considering like multinational or multi-state around rules, laws, all those different types of things when it comes from your design approach and governance approach around it. And it's very enlightening to see how practitioners out there have either overcome these, or their practitioners have gotten together to basically kind of break down and say, like, you should think about these, you should consider these ways and these avenues with this to try to move forward with what you're trying to accomplish with it. And so that's where it just exposed me to an area that, while I would feel confident fitting in that area, it's not something I get to sit in very often.
Yeah, yeah. And we don't often get to talk to our fellow practitioners, even in our roles in our traditional like our existing organizations. Product
Yeah.
work is very siloed. So I agree with you on that. And I think that is a good call out for the value of a product camp experience, especially at a practitioner level. Yes, you're going to see people speak and hear new ideas and thoughts, but how are they doing the same thing that I'm struggling with is perhaps something I'm hearing. Okay. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Well, yeah, and one of the things that being your first product camp, you actually had the courage to still put your hand up and be one of the presenters. And tell me about that experience and how was that different, maybe from other events that you've spoken at, and what was the vibe and feel of the room, and maybe a little bit insights for those of us that weren't there.
Yeah, so I've never had the opportunity to present to an audience of product developers and managers and owners and that kind of stuff with it. So it's, as I said, it's a different audience with it, and they have different goals and different learning with it. And trying to tailor like what I was trying to say to that audience, is like, what are they going to get out of it? What are they going to walk away as a part of this? And because I'm used to talking to like executives or business leaders or technology leaders and that kind of stuff, and they're a whole different audience with it, and versus the product managers with that. And so tailoring, kind of like, I want to say the same message, but I want to target what's something that they can take away with, like something that they can own as far as take action or follow through with it around it. And it allowed me to say something that I really wanted to say to a lot of product developers out there, was the goal of the value of understanding human behavior. Ultimately everything kind of comes down to, I think, especially in this AI world, is I think we need to become more tribal in regards to how we think around products with this. And because sometimes some of the products, there's a lot of initial assumptions up front. And the challenge with that is some of those assumptions are not always correct, with it. And especially in this changing world and the dynamics that we have with it, is being able to approach, let's take a step back and let's really look at how humans behave. Back when I went to college and stuff, they had a whole degree called human computer interaction as a part of this. And I think that's becoming more and more relevant now than ever when it comes to this AI world. Is like, I think we need to kind of take a step back and look at those dynamics with it. We may need to rethink how we design products around human behavior, because that's essentially what AI is here for. It's to mimic human behavior. And so maybe we need to think differently around it. And what I wanted to provide is a lens to be able to help them think differently, and why. Why should I think differently as a part of this? And that's what my presentation was hoping to be able to accomplish with it.
Well, and I do think, with product managers and designers and that is one thing that like I think they're experts in is around that human behavior, and they're always sort of thinking that realm. But how do you think, as you're talking about, I'm going to unpack that tribal and what you might mean by that, because I think some people hear tribal, they might think of negative connotations where it's like our group against theirs, but but I know like and I don't think you're meaning that. And I think one of the things that at least I always see with AI is I think people like to leverage AI to sort of paper over existing flaws that and this is almost like should have been lessons learned from RPA or like robotic process automation using acronyms or other things in the past where when you have messy processes and messy responsibilities and who shares what. And then you're like, well, let's just like use AI and we'll fix these things, right? But it really doesn't. It just like exacerbates and really brings them forward more. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. So, I use the tribal more about like how people are generally productive in an organization with it. And when you take a step back and you break things down even further, it comes down to, as a human, there's a lot of behaviors that we do unconsciously and consciously, but we never really pay attention to that. We never consider that. We never factor that into the equation of how we naturally interact with our world with this. And that's kind of what I was talking about from a product standpoint is that maybe we need to take a step back and look at those specific things, those unconscious behaviors as a part of this pattern and reinvent how we do products with this. And you certainly see a little bit of that, but ultimately, I talk about this is that people naturally, when you use a system or you use an interface or an app or a form, that is a controlled input with it. And that controlled input tells a story in of itself. I'm taking what I have up here and I'm putting it into something and I'm molding it in such a way within that format and that particular experience, the way I want that data to be, with it. The problem with that is that while I get a controlled input, there's all the other stuff that gets lost out of that. What came to be in order to be able for me to put that input in place? What are all the experiences? What are all the challenges? What did I have to do downstream, upstream, all these different types of dynamics to be able to put that input in place? And what I'm kind of saying, taking a step back is like, let's think about it more from a raw standpoint. How can we understand that raw behavior and design products to interface more of that raw interaction on how humans behave so that we can capture telemetry and data and information that we never have been able to do so that product would work better for how they naturally interact. And like one thing I talk about a lot is storytelling. Humans are natural storytellers. We're doing podcasts, and webinars and stuff. We're telling stories with this. How can we change the way we develop products by being better storytellers and allowing people to be more storytellers in order to accomplish the issues and goals and challenges they have, from that dynamic? And that's really kind of what I was talking about from a tribal standpoint is that let's look at our behavioral dynamics in order to help say, how can we build a better experience? And I'll give you a solid example of what I'm talking about. Project managers. One of the number one challenges from a project manager, and I'm sure it's also from a product manager as well, is status updates. That's something that's a huge part of their job. What are we at? Where is it going? Where are we at from a project standpoint? That type of thing. So they're spending a whole bunch of time collecting status updates with it. And like, here this form, fill this out, send this email around it. What if we could, from a product developer standpoint, say, hey, individual, I'm going to send you this notification, tap it, and I'm going to have you dictate the status update. And so you just say, well, this is what's going on. This is the status. This is what it means. This is where we're at with it. Done, sent off, type of thing. What if AI could just figure out all that raw information and understand this is what they're at. This is what they're doing. This is the project. This is really what the status update is. This is things that matter. These are the risks, all those types of behind the scenes dynamics with it. And then it presents it out in a nice, neat information to that project manager on where they need to take action on with it. But it's taking the raw the raw behavior, our voice, as a part of that to kind of translate that. And so like, that's kind of the example is like, let's think about product development that way on how humans naturally behave and how we're natural storytellers.
Yeah, I like that, certainly, and I think leaning into those things where it would make sense, and certainly form sometimes makes sense, and the open oration like definitely makes sense in many of those experiences. And so I don't know, in the room, was there anyone that sort of uh, did you get a when you presented this? Was there any debate? Was there any discussion? How did the room take your session, do you think?
I think there was some initial shock about, what I was talking about with this is because I talk about this concept of the behavioral record. And that behavioral record, originally it was really difficult to understand, all these dynamics that are out there, these organizational dynamics. And now that AI is accessible to the everyday person, and we're pointing at that behavioral record. And what I mean by behavioral record is our communication and collaboration data. There are things discoverable that were very difficult to kind of put together and package and understand and look at patterns relating to that. Now that's accessible, and it's technically accessible by anyone, that has AI and is able to point to that source and start asking questions with that. And that dynamic was, people never really thought about it from that lens, with it. They're like, what does that mean? And really my point is that this is an opportunity for an organization to self-discover, discover opportunities that have not been able to discover before. And really that's the kind of frontier of AI, in my opinion, is to see what can't be what you have not been able to see, and now you can as a part of this. And I think that really resonated with them because people were naturally doing this, but not thinking it from that lens with it. And that's really kind of woke up and reacted to what my book was about, and what all those dynamics are and what all those dynamics mean.
Yeah. I think you're pulling on a thread that I absolutely understand. I wasn't in your session. I think we had conflicting sessions at that time, but I can tell you from having led some conversations around your book, it's like, oh no, this is going to cause a ruckus, and I think it's actively causing a ruckus for anyone that's exploring that. I want to get your thoughts on. Yeah, I'm going to go back to the storytelling piece because I think the inbox journey for yourself, the title itself, an inbox between us, people think we're talking about email. And right, email's one of those spaces and surfaces to your point. But the piece where the story shifted for you in terms of I'm writing about what I see is happening as an opportunity to discovery. And then right now we've got this unique way to be thinking about this from a different perspective. Is there something there, an aha moment that you had where you're like, oh, this is not just me and my random thoughts. This is now a book. This is now something that I think there's, part of the work that I want to be leading and doing. And I don't know if you have a specific moment or a series of moments there that help tie that together for you.
Well, I think the first moment is that I was naturally doing this on my own. Like I wasn't planning on putting the book together or anything like that with it. I was journaling a bunch of notes because I'm like, I've been designing solutions and now I'm designing AI solutions, and I need to explain this to people. And I'm not just talking about leaders, but like the everyday person with this.
Mhm.
And as I was part of that journey, as I was interacting with a user, I was talking with her about it, and she broke down crying, while I was talking with it. And she was making comments through that process saying, I don't think I'm going to have a job anymore, with it. And I'm not going to, what am I going to do, with this? And I was looking at her and I'm just like, and then I started thinking about how, especially, this is a couple of years ago, how AI was being presented out to people, with this. And I'm like, this is not fair. I've been building solutions, very intimate solutions with all these different types of users out there. I know for a fact on why humans matter, like why they need to do their jobs, why they do the things that they do. and all the kinds of survival techniques that they have been doing, especially around tooling, in order to be able to make these things happen. And I was sitting there thinking, like, someone needs to write something for them. Someone needs to create understanding and clarity in this dynamic in the workplace. And that's why I dedicated my book to them, essentially. But I wanted to write essentially a message saying why humans will still matter and they will always matter, and change is hard, and this relationship, because that's what it is, it's a relationship. And some of this just kind of naturally came out as I was going through the book. Like, I didn't even think about it as a relationship until I was getting further into going back on like why people do the things that they do every day, with it. Because I've spent a lot of time documenting, like, why do people create Excel spreadsheets? Why do people create SharePoint lists? Why people to use email from a productivity standpoint with it? And so I started really documenting all of this, and I'm like, people don't remember that they do this. They don't think about any of these things. It's a natural acclimated behavior mechanism with this. And I'm like, people are doing this because someone has asked them to do something, and they're just figuring out how to make it happen. It's not good or bad, with it. They're surviving through all of this with it. And because you've assigned them a task that they have no real direct avenue to make this happen with it. And that's really why we value people in positions, because of all the judgment calls, all the decisions they make, all the things that they handle with it. And so as I was going through this as like, I can't even talk about AI until I explain to them how they behave, because a lot of people forget, and especially at a leadership level, like, why did I hire this person in the first place? It's not to do all these specific job duties. It's to handle all the ambiguous aspect of the job. The job duties is just, kind of top level directions. Like, here you go. Can you figure this out? Because that's why I hired you for. That's really what it is. And so that's where it just kind of naturally unfolded, through that process with it. When I started saying, I really need to talk about AI as a relationship, because that's really what it is. And that's eventually the point that I get to.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a complicated relationship. I
Yes,
didn't
it
mean to
is.
laugh at your spreadsheet there, but I do have to ask myself regularly, what are you doing a spreadsheet for now? Like, why does
Yeah.
this need to live in a spreadsheet? And
Yeah.
right, if you think about how we work today, before you joined, I was telling belaboring Dave about some of my weekend activities, and I was evaluating moving back to a spreadsheet on a piece of work that I'm doing, and I was like, I really don't want to do that. Like, this is how we work now, and I have to put trust in a system. But right, there's a lot of trust that could easily go out the window if I don't understand the implications when things change. And I think a lot of people are facing that at maybe it's it's an exponential level, for my opinion. I'll go ahead and put that out there. I think the speed at which things are changing, often weekly, is enough to put even the calmest of person at a pause, let alone somebody that's easily excited through change.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So what's your advice to folks like that? Because there's going to obviously there's going to be the folks that are going to be very naturally hesitant and you're not going to get, and I think maybe in the book, if I recall right, you might have said like a third of folks or some kind of a number that are going to be naturally apprehensive. But even folks that are maybe not as apprehensive, what advice would you have to them as they're trying to navigate this AI space? And speaking more from a individual contributor or maybe a frontline manager in product, that type of level, what would be your advice?
Yeah. So the biggest thing around how I instruct people when it comes to understanding where AI has opportunity for them, and what that relationship means, is that you now have the opportunity to understand and discover things that you've had questions from a really long time. So start asking those questions. And so the very first thing I say is, everyone has a mobile phone, with it. It took a long time, for mobile phones to get acclimated and be a part of our everyday life, even though everyone got one. But to truly like integrate the use of mobile phones in our day-to-day life and ecosystem, there was a lot of culture change in that. And that took, most of the uh, 2010s, to make that happen with it. And it's not any different with AI around it. But what I tell people is that you have a story to tell. Are you ready to tell that story? And like, what do I mean by that is that because the frontier of AI is self-realization. And what I mean by that is open up like your notes app on your mobile phone, hit dictate and tell your story about how you behave at work. What is frustrating? What is working? How you do your tasks? How you do all your individual behaviors on everything? Just unload. Tell everything, with it. You don't have to use AI right away, but essentially make a diary on how you do your job, what your frustrations are, what your challenges are, where you feel there are opportunities with it. Just start documenting that kind of stuff, those dynamics. And in those dynamics, you'll eventually get to a point like, all right, so now what do those dynamics mean? What story does that tell? So if I throw AI at this kind of framed, controlled unload of this, what story does this tell me? Where are there opportunities to understand or take action, accomplish a goal, accomplish a solution?
Differently.
Yeah, differently, as a part of this. Because and really that's the first step out there. And it's incredibly easy with it, but to a certain degree, it's very therapeutic. A lot of people have not got a chance to feel like that they can tell that story, with it. Now
Yeah.
you ask AI and make that happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there oh, sorry, go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say, yeah. So for one of the things that I reference it this way, I say, everyone should have an AI thinking partner that they're creating, right? And that it's very tuned to you. And both that it understands you very well, but also that it understands your goals. And I say, when people form these, like the best place to do it, or the best way to do it is should have a understanding personal and professional. You sometimes have to break those off into two separate things depending on where you're doing it and that, like, just depending on what your nature of work is. But by having a good understanding of yourself and being as honest to it about yourself, it will be able to best work with you. And to have that 24/7 place that you can, and now with the voice modes and that it can really make it a very magical experience. I mean, you have to be careful because like you don't want to just get lost and just say, hey, this is where my main interaction is. But at the same time, it's a way to test a lot of things. It's a way to, things that you wouldn't feel comfortable sharing with others, and probably others don't necessarily know about you. It's can really make it yourself, really upskill folks really quickly. So as they
Yeah.
move along.
I like what you're thinking about there, Dave, because I got a new computer, as I mentioned. And so, like, I've been trying to figure out where I separate where some of those conversations are. There is one me, I know that. And it's not a multiple personality question here, but the idea of, right, work Allison shows up and has these challenges and is working on these areas. Home Allison or creative thinking Allison might have some different modalities and different goals that they're trying to reach. And so thinking through like what projects those go into or what practice you build around each of those. Right. I suspect that's a little bit of what you kind of started with your own exploration, David. And is there any, I don't know, either one of you want to take this question. I don't know. We needed a group question here, but like, is there some moment where you're like, oh, I stop here. This is where I don't put this in this system, or this is where I step away, come back and kind of give itself maybe a problem that you've been working on or a space that you've been exploring that you're like, here's the edge. And that's when I need to walk back.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is the edge is when you need to separate your challenge versus the actual challenge you're trying to overcome, with it, to take the human emotional aspect and separate it away versus like, because if you incorporate that, like it'll understand that it's frustrated, and that kind of thing, but it's not really going to address the need or problem with it. If you need to unload or whatever, that's one thing with it, but it's more of the prescriptive aspect of how can we move forward from this and make that happen. That's where that separation comes into play as a part of that dynamic with it. And so you have to still be objective, despite how frustrated you are, still be objective around if you're going to interact with AI to try to solve a problem.
It's not your therapist. It's not your boss.
Yeah.
It's not your medical
Right.
provider, your legal expert.
Yeah.
but it is a lot of those things, right?
But
Like, I'm
it
going to
can get
challenge.
you.
I'm
It
going
can
to
get you.
challenge. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I think that's where, like, if you want to have it to push back in a good manner, right? Like, we all know we have certain things that we tend to. Most of us, as you get along in your age, you understand what biases you have, and you've heard enough things that and if you're willing to share those things and have it, try to, compliment yourself versus trying to, lean into your most probably negative tendencies, and we all have those negative tendencies, right? It can work really well in that. And that's whether it's like the, if you want to create your therapist version of it or your, other versions of it, some of it, like investing, I say, thinking about people with how they invest and understand like risk taking and not, and, how do you have it act in that sense to have the best outcome for yourself, despite how your tendencies may be, and remind you on things. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
been one of the best sense making and pattern recognition partners that I've ever had. So, like, we all, again, to your point, we have biases and we have hangups and individual preferences and ways of working. But to
Yeah.
have something to say, oh, it's that thing again, is really just thank you for recognizing it's the pattern again. It might still be frustrating that you're raising that right now, but
Well,
Mhm.
yeah, and this dynamic, and I talk about this a lot, is that, AI is only a part of the equation. It's a relationship.
Mhm,
So AI is there to help identify signals
mhm.
out there, but it will never have lived experience or lived
And
consequence. It will
judgment is
never have that.
ultimately ours. Yep, yep.
Correct. And yeah, and the judgment is ultimately ours. So it can help paint a picture, provide a path, provide an avenue with it, but you still have to look at that information, make decision, make judgment calls based on all your own lived experience and consequence and say, is this something I should move forward with? Is this a decision I should make? Generally, low consequence decisions, yeah, it's probably fine, with it. But as the risk starts getting larger and larger, needs to be more human and needs to stay on your side of the realm rather than the AI realm in kind of that automated decision making process with it. And that's what I talk about is that dynamics, that relationship around is figuring out what that actually means and where the line is drawn for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to just pivot us just for a moment back to our product friends. I know we went deep in the AI paint, and I knew we would. Can you think about perhaps where we are today? So we fast forwarded a bit from where the experience began for you, our own personal journeys of navigating where we are making sense with AI, and think about where we are today. Is there, something for someone who's listening in product right now that maybe before you add AI to your product or add whatever leadership team is telling you to add into your product for AI, what do you think there's one thing that you would ask them to either meaningfully raise or change that might help that outcome be better, knowing what we know now? And I say that, will not hold you to it because I know next week the information could change, but anything that stands out to you there?
Yeah. So my advice is that use AI to figure out how not to use AI. And
I
the
like
reason
that.
I say that is because um, the costs of AI are going up higher and higher with it. And your goal, from a product development manager is, you know, how can we provide a product in a way with all the capabilities and expectations, but be able to maintain operational costs of it. And that's why I talk about self-discovery is like there's patterns to everything, with it. And and it comes down to, is the juice worth the squeeze in regards to using AI or not using AI for that? Because what AI is designed to do is to deal with that ambiguous aspect, that ambiguous need, that ambiguous query around it where there isn't a deterministic way to potentially address or solve that problem. And a lot of times it can, just jumping to AI automatically and using that to solve the problem may not be the most cost effective way to address that need with it. And sometimes it may require you to break down the steps into even smaller steps and look at deterministic ways and kind of build those deterministic relationships to eventually get to that part. But use AI to help kind of reverse engineering your ideas or approach to say, is there a way to do this without having to use AI? And then I will use AI where it really needs to be because it's too ambiguous. Like I can't get what I'm trying to look for from a capability and need standpoint with it. Um, and that's kind of my advice moving forward is like from a cost efficiency standpoint, because it's not there for everything, but I think that's the best way to kind of think about with some of these AI avenues is that use AI to what it does best is uncover those opportunities and those signals and then be creative on your own with your own lived experience to figure out a way to not use AI until I need to actually use it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right tool for the job.
Right.
But now, what's your advice? Because obviously that tool and like what you would say 2 years ago versus a year ago versus even 2 months ago, that is constantly changing, right? And whether it's even on cost, like the cost curve is going like shooting way down, right? It's like 3% of like you pay $1 a couple years ago, you're paying like 3 cents on that dollar. I think the most recent data I've seen for that same token of like knowledge token. So what's your advice on, do you just encourage folks to try some of these things, try it in both like this? Obviously, when you're going to hey, I'm going to now build this into a product that has a large scaling, you're ready, figuring out what's the right tool for the job. But like to keep up that constant experimentation to understand where things are at and how things go. What's your advice to folks there?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is that from a product standpoint is, use the expense, use the heavier models to basically help figure out and plan, but figure out how to use the cheaper models in order to accomplish the goal in regards to that. And as models mature and the price goes down, you can always upgrade your model, with it over time. But the experimentation should be is like, how can I still do the same thing, but as cheaply as possible with it? And how can I use lower models to essentially make that happen? That's a creative approach. You're using your ingenuity around AI and orchestrating AI to work within confines of that to make it as cheap as possible to make that happen. And so it allows you to be exploratory and be creative in the ways of thinking around this because the most expensive model will always be the most expensive with it and those kind of limited transactional behaviors of it, that's fine because those costs can be controlled. But when you start getting into high volume, high processing type of things, you really want to look at the cheaper models in order to be able to make that happen. So you can control your ongoing operating costs around it. And eventually over time, what something was being used 5 years ago to what it is now, like there will be more and more capabilities to be offered as a part of this. But the one thing I would always say when it comes to AI is sustainability. Is how can you make that work the same time every time, no matter what, with it. And that's what I say from a deterministic standpoint is because AI, while it can do a lot of self-healing and self-considerations and self-fixing, the problem ultimately is when you start adding these layers on and things start, an issue happens and it can't self-heal, how do you fix it, with it? How do you control that fixing mechanism, that fixing process with it? So you still there's still deterministic ways to consider the patterns and the things you implement on how to do this. And then there's other ways to kind of implement on how to remediate or handle these different types of things because as you build more AI and have AI deal with those handoffs, there's less and less educated people on knowing how to fix it, with it and how to remediate those types of things. So it's kind of like the same type of behavior around like why I like teaching like Windows entry level classes when I was doing, because I was a college professor for a little bit, and why I still like to teach frontline classes because I still need to stay grounded on how things actually functioned, at a ground level and a more basic level, because I need to understand those fundamentals to design properly and approach different things properly with this. And don't let AI kind of take some of that away in order to be able to make that happen.
Yeah, I think it's just like, oh, I forgot what the movie was where people just kept on getting dumber, whatever that was called.
Oh, is it Idiocracy?
Yeah, Idiocracy, right? Because that is the fear of like what, because you
To
can
hand off your
really,
thinking.
Yeah, in fact, like for example, we were in our stories at one time putting in pre-written prompts for engineers as part of that, where the engineers could then just use those pre-written prompts, right? But of course, like doing that then made the engineers spend less time thinking about, or at least we were noticing that it seemed like there was maybe lesser quality of things coming out, lesser understanding of what was happening because you're just taking too much off of like, hey, okay, if you said it's this, I'm just going to grab this, going to put it in and assume that you done that right, right? So we all want to figure out like where is our boundary to your point on your thinking side, your judgment side, and how that works. A question I had, David, since you obviously wrote a book and I'm sure you used AI in some aspects of some part of that writing process, and I'm sure you write a lot normally, and I think product folks generally are pretty avid writers. How do you use AI in your writing process, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so a lot of times it helps me plan. I have an idea with it and where I kind of want to go with that idea. But as I said, my first layer has been like, digital diaries with it. So I have a lot of raw, documentation for me on conceptualizing things with this, and that process is critically important, with it. And then when it comes to AI, it will help me kind of organize and structure like, okay, these are the points that I really want to talk about. These are kinds of the things that I want to discuss, as a part of this. And so initially, especially when it comes from a newsletter standpoint with it, from a book standpoint, it helped me kind of understand, the best of my ability, where I need to change things, write things, eliminate certain things and certain types of behaviors, from an editing standpoint. And I would say from a book aspect, that was probably my weakest aspect on that, because talking about something and actually doing business writing are really kind of two different avenues with it. And so when I was going through the editing process with it, I'm like, I still feel like I'm kind of giving a speech, throughout the book with it. And to a certain extent, that was my goal with it. But I have a certain cadence and certain behaviors that I execute, when I do that type of thing. And it may not be as well received as something that's more of formalized business writing type of piece with it. But I was kind of like, I got to get the book out, with it. So there's certain sacrifices that I essentially have to make in order to be able to make that happen with it. But I've actually started to change my tune on AI writing and the relationship, because some of the newsletters I was like, I have all this process, I have all these thoughts and everything. I put it out there, and I want to write this, and I let AI write a lot of it. With it, it still comes from my thoughts and my processes and my reasoning for it, but it's still 100% AI written, at least from a presentational standpoint. And one thing that I wasn't quite prepared for is the backlash when it comes to writing out there. There's growing amount of people that are like, you're eliminating the creativity out of writing and your ability to write, with it as a part of this. And so some of the stuff I've started backpedaling on. I'm like, I will still use AI to basically help me understand structure, how to understand how to organize things with this. But I need to come up and approach this more from a humanistic standpoint, with it, because everything is starting to sound the same out there, like everything that's being put out. And so, like, how do I keep my stuff original, but not have it present in such a way where it sounds like everyone else, using AI to present these different types of things. So there's some behaviors where I'm like, I need to redefine this relationship with AI when it comes to my writing and putting things out with it. And that's something I've recently started doing, is like my process and my procedure, this is where it stops. This is where I take over, as a part of this. But time, I think that's the biggest issue around this, is time. And all of us don't have a lot of time, and especially from a brand standpoint and getting yourself out there, you need content, constant content all the way
Yeah.
out there. And I'm like, I have a life, I work, I have kids, all this kind of stuff with it. Is the juice worth the squeeze? putting something out there for maybe 10 people to read or consume something like
Yeah.
that,
Well, and I wonder
around
too
it.
if there's like a cadence that makes sense rather than,
Yeah.
right? No, I don't want to be a social media manager,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
it's, as an individual, we don't have time to divide our days even more than we already have them divided. So I think it's a trade-off of, okay, well, I don't have to do this every day, or I don't have to do 5 articles a month, or, whatever it might be. It might be, what if I did one a month, or what if I did one a week? What does that look like?
Right.
And then maybe is that process allowing you to balance that machine versus human experience. And I agree with you, because I think we get a lot in here. Getting it out onto paper or to voice is a great way to be able to look at what's there. Is there a story there? Is there something worth telling there? So it's a great call out. We have flown through this session as I knew we would. We have a section at the end called Rapid Fire. It is not meant to be anything you have to think real deeply about. And so I'm going to kick us off with the first question here. What's a belief about product management that you held 5 years ago that you maybe held strongly and have since abandoned?
I think that the decision makers know what they want.
Mm-hmm.
And to a certain extent, it was just, I felt like, to my inexperience around this, like it may have been from a relationship standpoint that they know what they want, but it ultimately came down to they know what they want, but they don't know really what is needed, in regards to solving and addressing the need and problem with it. So I didn't realize how much of a disconnect was there, 5 years ago until now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So next question is, what did you have to unlearn to get good at this work?
I had to unlearn how I perceived things. A lot of it is to really take a step back and learn how to be other people.
Or rethink things, from another perspective.
Correct.
Yeah.
Like, and that's why I said, like, learning how to understand how people feel, like organizational psychology, like that's one thing I was not prepared for. And the more and more I dived into product development, the more I realized how critically important organizational psychology was, and how intimate it needs to be to truly provide an ideal product to someone.
Yeah. Yeah. This has been so much fun, David. I thank you so much for sharing that. And I really have appreciated how quickly this conversation, every conversation with you goes so fast. But really glad that you were able to join us for ProductCamp Conversations today. Dave, is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
I appreciate the conversation. We'll have to do this again. And thanks for the good book. I hope others can take that and grab it, read it. He has the audiobook version and the physical or the electronic. I bought 2 of them because I first bought the Kindle, and then I went with the audiobook too to complement it. If people want to get in touch with you or follow up with you, what's the best way that they can do so, David?
Yeah, so my website, davidchristopherdean.com, or you can go to inboxbetweenus.com to learn more about the book. I'm also on LinkedIn as well, and either avenue is the best way to reach out to me.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye.
That's it for this episode of ProductCamp Conversations. If something here sparked an idea or a potential guest, or you want to push back on something, we'd love to hear from you. Reach us at productcampconversations@gmail.com. And if you know a product person who'd get something out of this, send it their way. Have a great day wherever you are. We'll catch you next time on PCC.
Everybody talk PCC. Posters on the wall, big